After leaving Mr. Fox's place, Rich wandered around the streets. After finalizing this deal, he would soon receive his first payment, and the amount would directly depend on how much he invested. The more he invested, the higher the profit. Even the top financial conglomerates would be envious of such a business. During this time, he had been reading newspapers. Even though the whole world was focused on development and economic improvement, the promised annual return rates of some funds did not exceed 15%. The Trading Post, in the first quarter of this year, disclosed some detailed data from last year, and the fund with the highest actual return rate was only 9.74%, which was less than 10%, and became the most profitable fund of last year. So, this deal was very important, but at the same time, a new problem arose. He needed a capital to exchange for those coins and bills. Mr. Fox didn't mention this money, and with his background check on Rich, he couldn't possibly not know that Rich didn't even have $100 on him or in his bank account, let alone the scale of his promised assistance to Mr. Fox. He had to get some more money, not too much. A few hundred or $1,000 or $2,000 would be enough, because once this started, the speed would only get faster. He planned to talk to Catherine about it when he went back at night. Although he felt that doing such a thing was indeed but for the future, there was no other way. Time passed bit by bit while he was wandering around, and today Rich returned home early. It was 6:30 in the evening when Catherine came back with a bag. Inside were some leftover meat scraps from the supermarket where she worked, and some not-so-fresh-looking vegetables. These things would basically be divided among the employees. After all, the purpose of accepting oppression and exploitation here was to get these things for free. When she returned to the apartment, Catherine was a little surprised. Recently, Rich would always come back very late, and today was the first time he came back early. At first, she fantasized that Rich would honestly go find a job, preferably in a factory. Although the work in the factory was very hard and had some risks, it had to be said that the welfare benefits and social security for the workers were the best. The big business owners not only took care of all aspects of their employees, but they could also join organizations like unions. Catherine couldn't join them as she worked in the supermarket because she wasn't a worker. Moreover, there was no unofficial organization like the Cashiers Guild. Nightmares always linger, while good dreams easily wake up. For a whole week, Rich, who had just regained his spirit, returned to the starting point, just in a different way. He was no longer staying at home, but using the excuse of job hunting to spend time outside. Thinking about this, Catherine became disheartened. She felt that her past choices were not just foolish, but also that they had blinded her. It was through these experiences that she realized how correct her mother's words were. Looks are not enough. Life requires a foundation, not just good looks. She looked up at Rich and changed her shoes, carrying the bag into the kitchen to start cleaning up the meat scraps. These meat scraps were all taken off the bone frame, irregular in shape, most the size of a finger, and for some reason, they appeared darker than the neatly arranged beef. So even though their price was low, they were difficult to sell, and most people bought them not for themselves, but to feed their dogs. In reality, these meat scraps had no problems. The room was filled with a silent atmosphere that made people uncomfortable, a feeling that continued to spread and surge. Rich sat on a couch they had picked up from the garbage dump, watching his girlfriend silently handle the food. Although the distance between the two was less than 10 meters, it seemed as if a deep abyss had appeared in between. "Do you have any extra money?" Rich asked. Catherine's movements in her hand paused for a moment. She didn't turn around and didn't say anything. After a brief pause, she continued with her work. These meat scraps were all taken off the bone frame, irregular in shape, most the size of a finger, and for some reason, they appeared darker than the neatly arranged beef. So even though their price was low, they were difficult to sell, and most people bought them not for themselves, but to feed their dogs. In reality, these meat scraps had no problems. The room was filled with a silent atmosphere that made people uncomfortable, a feeling that continued to spread and surge. Rich sat on a couch they had picked up from the garbage dump, watching his girlfriend silently handle the food. Although the distance between the two was less than 10 meters, it seemed as if a deep abyss had appeared in between. "Do you have any extra money?" Rich asked. Catherine's movements in her hand paused for a moment. She didn't turn around and didn't say anything. After a brief pause, she continued with her work.
"I have some. Less than $500. It's what I saved up this year."
Saving money was not easy, especially for young people with only a high school education. Rent, electricity, water, heating, necessary expenses and losses, plus the fact that only one person was working while the two of them were living together. It was already very difficult to save more than $400. Suddenly, the atmosphere became even more eerie, pressing on the chests of the two. Neither of them spoke again until Catherine finished dinner. As usual, There were fragments mixed with fried eggs, as well as some tattered vegetable leaves, and some wide noodles broken into 1 or 2 centimeters. These were all things that the supermarket needed to discard every day, and now they fed many poor families.
Today my mother came to see me. Catherine broke the calm while eating. She doesn't want us to continue like this, but I can't convince her.
Rich put down his knife and fork, looking at the fresh seasoning added to the girl's plate, transparent, slightly bitter, and slightly salty. In fact, Catherine had already made her words very clear. She couldn't convince her mother, so one of them would inevitably have to convince the other, and it could only be her who would be convinced. The things in the plate that weren't very tasty became even worse. Rich sighed. When are you leaving? Catherine was on the verge of collapse.
Tomorrow, my mother and brother will come to pick me up. I'm sorry, I don't want it to be like this, but…
It's okay. You don't have to apologize. I should be the one apologizing. Rich reached out and touched the girl's tear-stained cheek. He needed to pay for what he had done with his body before. For over 2 years, all the burdens of life had been placed on this 20-year-old girl. Without a doubt, Rich was a scumbag, a really scummy one. This kind of life gradually wore away the girl's romantic and future fantasies. She experienced these things and began to bow down to reality and fate, even though there might still be a hint of fantasy deep in her heart. For example, no examples. Rich wouldn't ask the girl to stay, whether she said she wanted to leave first, or if it was something uncertain in the future. But a life filled with some insecurity and danger was not suitable for this girl. Although it may sound cruel to say, it's just the truth. After a memorable night, Catherine left early the next morning with her things, but she also left something for Rich. A passbook and the key to the apartment. We should thank the bank for not caring about who accesses the money in the passbook. This may also be evidence of Catherine bidding farewell to her past life. After tidying up, Rich withdrew all the money from the passbook in the morning, $449.35. Then he found the landlord, and after chatting for about half an hour, he returned the remaining half month's rent, deducting $100, originally $75. But Rich didn't want his things anymore. The landlord didn't think this deal was too bad and eventually agreed, giving an extra $25. He kept the change to meet his immediate living needs, and the rest would be put into his plan. He was getting impatient, eager to teach this pure world a lesson.